Ever wonder what it's like to work with Dirk Verbeuren, the drummer for Megadeth? I'm going to tell you all about my experience in this video. Now, if you're looking for a story of someone acting like a jerk, I do have that. It's about the first singer that I worked with on this project, but working with Dirk was basically great. So if you're looking for a story where I'm bad-mouthing him, that's not what you're going to hear. The reason I needed to hire someone, which turned out to be Dirk, is that this project was held up for a long time and the original drummer who had done the rest of the album was no longer available, and I had added 2 songs. One of them is a metal romp, kind of like you would expect from Megadeth's drummer, and the other one is a ballad. And Dirk did say to me that he hadn't had a chance to play on something that light, so he appreciated the opportunity. Even though he hadn't performed on a song like that, I saw no reason why he wouldn't be able to do it. You know, I'm someone who does metal, but I also do acoustic guitar music. I've released a whole album of that, so I knew he could probably do it and it would be fine, and of course I was right about that. I also didn't want to go through the trouble of hiring a second drummer. One of the issues that we have to deal with is the potential for the tones on the drums not matching the rest of the album, and this was something that I did address with him when I hired him. But if I hired multiple people to do this, each time another drummer comes on, I have this problem exponentially. When I first Googled hiring a metal drummer, I found a website where you can hire all sorts of people from one band or another. These are bands that sometimes are household names, like Megadeth. Sometimes it's a lesser known metal band. So it's a pretty cool site, but when I tried to reach out to Dirk through that site, I wasn't able to, and I had to find another way to contact him. But I was surprised at first to see that, a drummer of that caliber was available for studio work. Of course, now I know that he does a lot of studio work, and this is one of the advantages of hiring him. He's set up to do this, and he's a real pro about it. At the time that I was reaching out to Dirk, I saw that Megadeth was on a break in between legs of a tour. And it was about a month long, so I figured he's probably going to tell me, even if he says yes, that it's going to be after the next leg of the tour. To my surprise, he was able to get this done within 2 weeks of me first contacting him. So again, this is one of the great things about working with him. He's very efficient. Now, when we're trying to attract a drummer of this caliber or any other type of musician, we want to put our best foot forward. So I had most of the album mixed professionally at this point, but of course the song that I was sending him was not professionally mixed yet because it was missing his drums. So to give the best impression, what I did is I created an account on something like SoundCloud, and I created a private playlist, and I put all of the songs, including the 2 that he would be performing on, up on there in the order that they were intended to be in. And I told him in the email, this is what most of the songs sound like. Obviously, my own mixes are a little bit less professional sounding than that, but I wanted him to get an understanding this is a pro project. It's not going to be some crappy sounding mix that I do here in my studio. I can do a decent mix. It might sound better than, say, the first album by one metal band or another because they usually had limited budgets, but it's not going to compare with something major. And of course, he's in Megadeth. I want him to realize this is going to be a pro product that he'll be associated with. I was also hoping that not only would he like the 2 songs I was asking him to play on, but that he would hear the rest of the album, give it a listen, just even briefly, and decide, yeah, this is a good album and I want to be associated with this. And he did in fact say that. He thought the whole thing sounded like it was going to be a really strong album and it sounded professional. I also told him in the initial email that I have Pro Tools, which you actually see on the screen behind me. That's the industry standard recording software, and I wanted him to know mine's up to date, so there's not going to be any trouble with us transferring files back and forth. I don't have some third-rate software where importing it into his Pro Tools or whatever he's using is going to be a problem. It helps to come across professionally and like you've got your act together, so that's part of what I was trying to get across. I also told him that I have stems available. Now, for those of you not familiar with this, a stem is something like all of the guitars. Let's say there's 6 tracks of guitars, and I mix it all down to one stereo track. And then you do the same thing with all the vocals. So instead of sending them 10 vocal tracks, it's all down to 1 stereo vocals. Each of those is called a stem. So you've got the drums, the rough drums I had done, the bass, which normally you don't really need to do that because it's only 1 bass track. All the guitars is 1 stereo track, all the vocals. The reason to do this is that, for all I know, Dirk doesn't want to hear the vocals when he's doing the drums. Or maybe he wants to turn off the bass guitar so he can just focus on the rhythm guitar and I'm the guitarist. On that note, I also turned off all the reverb on my guitar so that it was a relatively dry mix because that can be tighter to listen to and to perform to. And of course, he's a drummer, so you want synchronicity. So I was basically trying to make it clear to him, look, I can give you everything you need to do this quickly. You can raise and lower. He knows what a stem is and he knows what they're used for. So just by saying this, he knows, okay, Randy's got his act together and he's going to give me something where I can turn on and off things. I can raise the volume on the drums or the guitar or whatever, to suit my needs. One thing I was hoping to get across is that I was thinking about what he needs to get his job done. I put on my producer hat. How can I help him do this and make it easy and also not be a pain in the butt? Let's say I send him the the stem of the rhythm guitars, and it's got all this reverb, and he hears it and goes, I wish I could turn that off, but I can't because Randy, merged it. And then he'd have to email me and say, hey, can you do me that again, but without the reverb. I wanted to eliminate this sort of back and forth and make it clear that I understand this kind of thing. One special consideration I brought up is that we actually used my electronic drum set to do the drums on the album, but we used the original drummer's real cymbals because we thought that sounded better. So I asked, I knew that Dirk could do either the whole thing on electronic drums or the whole thing on live drums. So I told him, are you okay with mixing the drums with the live cymbals? And he said he had never done that before and he preferred to just do one or the other. So I said, okay, let's go with the live drums because I thought the cymbals were going to be the bigger issue there. It is possible in modern recording software to do sound replacement. So even if his drums sounded different than the ones on the album, we could probably do something with that sound replacement. And as it turns out, he also sent me the MIDI for that. And if you don't know what MIDI is, it's basically the corresponding data of how hard you hit a drum, which ones you hit when and all that. So if possible, we could also use that. So he was also flexible in giving me whatever I needed to get this to work and to merge that with the rest of the album. On that note, I also sent him a final mix of just the drums from one of the other songs so that his engineer could isolate all those tones and try to match the tone before they even recorded. One of the other things I also included, which was important, was the reference drums. As it turns out, I'm mostly a guitar player, but I've learned to play drums and I can do a pretty good job. But I still wanted someone else to do this just because it can sound a little too rigid if the same person did all the guitars, bass, and drums. And I did spend so much money on Dirk that I ended up not having the budget to hire a bassist, and I did do the bass myself. But I sent him the reference drums so he could get an idea of the feel that I was going for with this song. Now, speaking of rates and cost, I'm not going to tell you how much it costs to hire Dirk because that's his personal business, but it is a decent chunk of money. And when you hire a premium player, of course, it comes with the premium cost. Now, as it turns out, I also had to pay his recording engineer. So that was something that I wasn't really expecting, but it was fine. And, he told me the cost in the initial email and we agreed to go ahead with it. For those of you who haven't hired someone, typically once you've made the arrangements, they do their performance. And when they send you like an MP3 of that, after you've agreed that performance is fine and you're all done, I then send a payment. And then at that point, they send me the final files. So this is fairly standard. And this is how we did this as well. When we're approaching someone, we want to be as concise as possible. So I worked on this email quite a bit, did a kind of brain dump of everything I wanted to say, and then I edited that thing down to be as short and to the point as possible, figuring if we have questions, he can always ask those later. There are certain things that I left off of that email. For example, I usually want to give a little bit of creative direction, but I didn't say a word about that at the time. One of the things that came up is that we exchange files via Dropbox. And I also have my own engineer, not for recording, but for mixing. And so at some point, all four of us were in on the same conversations where it's me and Dirk and then his engineer and then my recording engineer. And it's mostly because we were doing that coordination about what kind of files does my guy need? What do they need to do the performances? What are they going to send me? And how can we make sure that this all goes smoothly? So this was all handled very professionally. Now, to my surprise, he said he could get this done in about 2 weeks, and he did. Literally 2 weeks after I emailed him, or even less, he sent me the final performances. Now, my personal take on performers is to let them put their creative stamp on something. You don't want to be dictating stuff to them too much. But that said, I'm the artist. I'm the guy behind Black Halo. I'm also the songwriter, and I'm the producer. So, of course, it is my job and my responsibility to give some creative direction. Of course, he had the reference drums. So after we had agreed to do the project, I sent him an email for each song with as few comments as possible, just saying, okay, here is a few things I want you to do on this song. Feel free to experiment and override me. I would love it if you do something better than what I did, but I'm fine with you also repeating what I've done. For the ballad, which is called In Death I Linger On, the chorus on that song was really strange for me to play along to on drums when I first did it. When I wrote the guitar, I didn't think so, and the rest of it had been done, but I was struggling to play drums to it myself, and I came up with something that might be considered slightly funky, but it did seem to work. So I mentioned this to him, and I said, I think this works. You can certainly do this, but feel free to think of something else. Now, as it turns out, he did do what I did on that part. Towards the end of the song, I also wanted it to go double time, even though it's a ballad, and I want a lot of cymbal crashes on there for the intensity to be kind of rising as the song is fading out. But otherwise, I didn't give him that much direction on the ballad. For Two Lights Beckon, I did have a few more directions to him. At the end of the song, I wanted it to get increasingly more intense on the drums. And then at the start of the song, the rhythm guitar and the bass are playing a rhythm figure in unison. And I wanted that to be just matched on the drums before he switches to what you might call a regular drum beat. The other issue there is in the chorus. At times I'm playing rhythm guitar parts where I'm hitting the 16th notes rapidly, and I always thought it would sound good if the drums were basically doing the same thing. And I think the only other comment I made for that is for if he's doing drum fills on those, to maybe not do the same drum fill each time, but to mix it up. That's my personal preference when I listen to stuff is a certain amount of variety, so I made a suggestion, but I told him, these are just general suggestions, put your own stamp on this. Now, I have no way of knowing how many takes he did of each song, but I can tell you that when he sent me an MP3 for each of them, I had no comments to the negative about any of these. There was nothing I wanted to change. I thought they sounded great. Now, to my surprise, he did a few things that were exactly like what I had done. For example, on Two Lights Beckon, right before each verse, there's a drum fill that I had done, and I didn't think it was the best drum fill. I thought maybe someone else is gonna, think, oh, a drummer wouldn't play that. But he actually did those drum fills. Now, I've decided to take that as a huge compliment. For the chorus on In Death I Linger On, he did do my treatment of that. So there was actually quite a bit of a matching of what I had done in the reference drums. I wouldn't say that I was disappointed. I was a little bit surprised. I thought he would change things up a little bit more, but again, I've decided to take this as a compliment. If you want to hear just how similar the drum performances by him and me are, if you join the newsletter, I do send out the MP3 of these so you can hear them and compare them. I'll reiterate that it was extremely professional working with him. Everything was done quickly and smoothly, and I had no problems with importing any of the files that he sent me. Generally, it was just a great experience. I have worked with quite a few musicians, some at different levels, some who are total novices in the studio, and this was the definition of a pro, just handling everything very smoothly. And so in that sense, I can't recommend him enough. Dirk is like any session musician. Once the work has been done and paid for, you generally go your separate ways, and you may not have anything to do with each other since then. But that said, I tried to stay in contact with him a little bit, sending him brief updates on how the album was coming. And one reason I did that is that I was hoping he would give me a kind of bonus, which was maybe he'd give a shout out to his fan base. It took a year in between his performances before the first singles were released, and another 6 months before the album was released, which was in the past week, actually. Now, Dirk is very cool, and to prove that, I did ask him, hey, would you be willing to give a shout out now that Two Lights Beckon has been released? And he said yes. He did it again for In Death I Linger On. Again, can't say enough about how cool this is. A lot of people would not do that. Now, that said, unfortunately, the way he did these shout outs, I don't think it was really clear to his fan base that he had played on these songs. So I still think they don't know. He took something that I had posted on Instagram and promoted it on his Instagram, but it didn't say, this song featuring Dirk Verbeuren on it. So I don't think his fan base actually knows this. A lot of you are probably wondering, well, would I work with Dirk again? And the answer is it really depends. You do pay a premium for a premium player, and to put this in perspective, Black Halo is a new band. We have no following. We are not performing live. Otherwise, I would have already had a drummer. So it's hard, and if not impossible, to get press coverage. And that's actually one of the reasons I wanted to hire Dirk. I was hoping it would be something that would assist me in getting any sort of coverage. And so far, that hasn't been true. I did get some coverage for the singles, but I didn't get any more coverage for the songs that Dirk played on than the ones that he had not played on. And so far with the album release, it was a week ago, and maybe it'll have an effect in the future, but you typically try to get CD reviews arranged before that, and I have not gotten a single one as I sit here. So it didn't help in that sense. And that's not on Dirk. It's not his fault. It has nothing to do with the quality of what he's done. The quality of what you're doing doesn't matter if no one even listens to it. Now, that said, a certain number of the press did listen to the songs I sent out because, again, I had a private playlist and I could see how many of them had listened to one song or another. But so far, it hasn't really helped with bringing new fans to the band. And again, that's not on Dirk, but it is a reality that the money that I spent on Dirk, it may have been better to spend that on promo. And that's something that I'm doing a lot now, where I'm seeing, I'm seeing that budget difference. I'm like, oh, I could be doing this, but I can't afford it because I spent some of that money on Dirk. So should you hire Dirk Verbeuren to play on your album? That entirely depends. You're going to have to look at your situation. But if budget is not a concern and you really want it done very well and with no fuss, then absolutely you should hire Dirk Verbeuren. If you want to hear either of the songs that he played on, you can do so right here on YouTube. Below this video, there will be links to In Death I Linger On, the ballad, the lyric video for that, and then the lyric video for Two Lights Beckon. You can also find us on any streaming service, and I'll have the link below where if you click on it, it's kind of universal. Once you click on it, it pulls up a screen, and you can pick whichever service you want to listen to it on. Please remember to like the video and subscribe.